The de Havilland DH.98 Mosquito was a British multi-role combat aircraft with a two-man crew that served during and after the Second World War. It was one of few operational frontline aircraft of the era constructed almost entirely of wood and was nicknamed the Wooden Wonder. The Mosquito was also known affectionately as the Mossie to its crews. Originally conceived as an unarmed fast bomber, the Mosquito was adapted to roles including low to medium altitude daytime tactical bomber, high altitude night bomber, pathfinder, day or night fighter, fighter bomber, intruder, maritime strike aircraft, and fast photo-reconnaissance aircraft. It was also used by the British Overseas Airways Corporation as a fast transport to carry small high-value cargoes to, and from, neutral countries, through enemy-controlled airspace. When the Mosquito began production in 1941, it was one of the fastest operational aircraft in the world. Entering widespread service in 1942, the Mosquito was a high-speed, high-altitude photo-reconnaissance aircraft, continuing in this role throughout the war. From mid-1942 to mid-1943 Mosquito bombers flew high-speed, medium or low-altitude missions against factories, railways and other pinpoint targets in Germany and German-occupied Europe. From late 1943, Mosquito bombers were formed into the Light Night Strike Force and used as pathfinders for RAF Bomber Command's heavy bomber raids. They were also used as nuisance bombers, often dropping blockbuster bombs, 4,000 lb cookies in high-altitude, high-speed raids that German night fighters were almost powerless to intercept. As a night fighter, from mid-1942, the Mosquito intercepted Luftwaffe raids on the United Kingdom, notably defeating Operation Steinbock in 1944. Starting in July 1942, Mosquito night fighter units raided Luftwaffe airfields. As part of 100 Group, it was a night fighter and intruder supporting RAF Bomber Command's heavy bombers and reduced bomber losses during 1944 and 1945. As a fighter bomber in the 2nd Tactical Air Force, the Mosquito took part in special raids, such as the attack on Amiens prison in early 1944, and in precision attacks against Gestapo or German intelligence and security forces. 2nd Tactical Air Force Mosquitoes supported the British Army during the 1944 Normandy campaign. From 1943 Mosquitoes with RAF Coastal Command strike squadrons attacked Kriegsmarine U-boats and intercepting transport ship concentrations. The Mosquito flew with the Royal Air Force and other air forces in the European theatre, and the Mediterranean and Italian theatres. The Mosquito was also used by the RAF in the Southeast Asian theatre, and by the Royal Australian Air Force based in the Himalayas and Borneo during the Pacific War. Development. By the early mid-1930s, de Havilland had a reputation for innovative high-speed aircraft with the DH-88 Comet Razor. The later DH-91 Albatross airliner pioneered the composite wood construction that the Mosquito used. The 22-passenger Albatross could cruise at 210 miles per hour at 11,000 feet, better than the 100 miles per hour Handley Page HP-42 and other biplanes it was replacing. The wooden monocoque construction not only saved weight and compensated for the low power of the de Havilland Gypsy 12 engines used by this aircraft, but simplified production and reduced construction time. Air Ministry bomber requirements and concepts. On September 8, 1936, the British Air Ministry issued specification pages 13/36 which called for a twin-engined medium bomber capable of carrying a bomb load of 3,000 pounds for 3,000 miles with a maximum speed of 275 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. A maximum bomb load of 8,000 pounds which could be carried over shorter ranges was also specified. Aviation firms entered heavy designs with new high-powered engines and multiple defensive turrets, leading to the production of the Avro Manchester and Handley Page Halifax. In May 1937, as a comparison to pages 13/36, George Vauquert, the chief designer of Handley Page, put forward the concept of a fast unarmed bomber. In 20 pages, Vauquert planned an aerodynamically clean medium bomber to carry 3,000 pounds of bombs at a cruising speed of 300 miles per hour. There was support in the RAF and Air Ministry. Captain R.N. Liptrot, Research Director Aircraft 3, appraised Vauquert's design, calculating that its top speed would exceed the new Supermarine Spitfire. There were, however, counter-arguments that, although such a design had merit, it would not necessarily be faster than enemy fighters for long. The ministry was also considering using non-strategic materials for aircraft production, which, in 1938, had led to Specification B9/38 and the Armstrong-Whitworth Albemarle medium bomber, largely constructed from spruce and plywood attached to a steel tube frame. The idea of a small, fast bomber gained support at a much earlier stage than sometimes acknowledged, though it was unlikely that the Air Ministry envisaged it not using light alloy components. Inception of the de Havilland fast bomber. Geoffrey de Havilland also believed a bomber with an aerodynamic design, with minimal skin area, was better than the Page's 13/36 specification. He thought that adapting the Albatross to meet the RAF's requirements could save time. In April 1938, performance estimates were produced for a twin Rolls-Royce Merlin-powered DH-91, with the Bristol Hercules and Napier Sabre as alternatives. On July 7, 1938, Geoffrey de Havilland wrote to Air Marshal Wilfred Freeman, the Air Council's member for research and development, discussing the specification and arguing that in war there would be shortages of duralumin and steel but should be plenty of wood. Although inferior torsionally, the strength-to-weight ratio of wood was as good as duralumin or steel, and a different approach to a high-speed bomber was possible. A follow-up letter to Freeman on July 27 said that the Page's 13/36 specification could not be met by a twin Merlin-powered aircraft and either the top speed or load capacity would be compromised, depending on which was paramount. For example, a larger, slower, turret-armed aircraft would have a range of 1,500 miles carrying a 4,000-pound bomb load, with a maximum of 260 miles per hour at 19,000 feet, and a cruising speed of 230 miles per hour at 18,000 feet. De Havilland believed that too much of a compromise, and that getting rid of surplus equipment would lead to a better design. On October 4, 1938, de Havilland projected the performance of another design based on the Albatross, powered by two Merlin XS, with a 3-man crew and 6 or 8 forward-firing guns, plus 1 or 2 manually operated guns and a tail turret. Based on a total loaded weight of 19,000 lb, it would have a top speed of 300 mph and cruising speed of 268 mph at 22,500 ft. Still believing this could be improved, and after examining more concepts based on the Albatross and the new all-metal DH-95 Flamingo, de Havilland settled on designing a new aircraft that would be aerodynamically clean, wooden and powered by the Merlin, which offered substantial future development. The new design would be faster than foreseeable enemy fighter aircraft, and could dispense with a defensive armament, which would slow it and make interception or losses to anti-aircraft guns more likely. Instead, high speed and good maneuverability would make it easier to evade fighters and ground fire. The lack of turrets simplified production and reduced production time, with a delivery rate far in advance of competing designs. Without armament, the crew could be reduced to a pilot and navigator. Contemporary RAF design philosophy required well-armed heavy bombers more akin to the German Schnellbomber. At a meeting in early October 1938 with Geoffrey de Havilland, Charles Walker, the Air Ministry showed little interest and, instead, asked de Havilland to build wings for other bombers as a subcontractor. By September 1939, de Havilland had produced preliminary estimates for single and twin-engine variations of light bomber designs using different engines, speculating on the effects of defensive armament on their designs. One design, completed on September 6, was for an aircraft powered by a single 2,000 HP Napier Sabre, with a wingspan of 47 foot and capable of carrying a 1,000 pounds bomb load 1,500 miles. On September 20, in another letter to Wilfred Freeman, de Havilland wrote, "We believe that we could produce a twin-engine bomber which would have a performance so outstanding that little defensive equipment would be needed." By October 4, work had progressed to a twin-engine light bomber with a wingspan of 51 ft3 in, and powered by Merlin or Griffon engines, the Merlin favored because of availability. On October 7, 1939, with war a month old, the nucleus of a design team under Eric Bishop moved to the security and secrecy of Salisbury Hall and started on what was now known as the DH-98. To make the DH-98 more versatile, Bishop made provision for 420 cannon in the forward half of the bomb bay, under the cockpit, firing via blast tubes and troughs under the fuselage. The DH-98 was too radical for the ministry, which wanted a heavily armed, multi-role aircraft, combining medium bomber, reconnaissance and general-purpose roles, as well as capable of carrying torpedoes. With outbreak of war, the ministry became more receptive, but still skeptical about an unarmed bomber. It thought the Germans would produce fighters faster than expected. It suggested 2 forward and 2 rear-firing machine guns for defense. The ministry also opposed a 2-man bomber, wanting at least a third crewman to reduce the work of the others on long flights. The Air Council added further requirements, such as remotely controlled guns, a top speed of 275 mph at 15,000 ft on 2/3 engine power, and a range of 3,000 mi with a 4,000 lb bomb load. To appease the ministry, de Havilland built mock-ups with the gun turret just aft of the cockpit but, apart from this compromise, de Havilland made no changes. On November 12, at a meeting considering fast bomber ideas put forward by de Havilland, Blackburn, and Bristol, Marshal Freeman directed de Havilland to produce a fast aircraft, powered initially by Merlin engines, with options of using progressively more powerful engines, including the Rolls-Royce Griffon and the Napier Sabre. Although estimates were presented for a slightly larger Griffon-powered aircraft, armed with a 4-gun tail turret, Freeman got the requirement for defensive weapons dropped, and a draft requirement was raised calling for a high-speed light reconnaissance bomber capable of 400 mph at 18,000 ft. On December 12, the Vice Chief of the Air Staff, Director General of Research and Development, Air Officer Commanding-in-Chief of RAF Bomber Command met to finalize the design and decide how to fit it in the RAF's aims. The AOC&C would not accept an unarmed bomber, but insisted it would be suitable for reconnaissance missions with F-8 or F-24 cameras. After representatives of the company, the Ministry and the RAF's operational commands examined a full-scale mock-up at Hatfield on December 29, 1939, the project received backing. This was confirmed on January 1, 1940, when Air Marshal Freeman chaired another meeting with Geoffrey de Havilland, John Buchanan, and John Connolly, who was Buchanan's Chief of Staff. Claiming the DH-98 was the fastest bomber in the world, de Havilland added it must be useful. Freeman supported its production for RAF service and ordered a single prototype for an unarmed bomber variant to specification B-1DH, which called for a light bomber reconnaissance aircraft powered by two 1,280 HP Rolls-Royce Room 3SM with ducted radiators, capable of carrying a 1,000 pounds bomb load. The aircraft was to have a speed of 397 miles per hour at 23,700 feet and a cruising speed of 327 miles per hour at 26,600 feet with a range of 1,480 miles at 24,900 feet on full tanks. Maximum service ceiling was to be 32,100 feet. On March 1, 1940, Air Marshal Roderick Hill issued a contract under specification B1/40, for 50 bomber reconnaissance variants of the DH-98, this contract included the prototype, which was given the factory serial EO-234. In May 1940, specification F-21/40 was issued, calling for a long-range fighter armed with 420 cannon and 4.303 machine guns in the nose, after which de Havilland were authorized to build a prototype of a fighter version of the DH-98. It was decided after a debate that this prototype, given the military serial number W4052, would carry airborne interception MKIV equipment as a day and night fighter. By June 1940, the DH-98 had been named Mosquito. Having the fighter variant kept the Mosquito project alive because there was still criticism within the government and Air Ministry of the usefulness of an unarmed bomber, even after the prototype had shown its capabilities. Project Mosquito. Once design of the DH-98 had started, de Havilland built mock-ups, the most detailed at Salisbury Hall, in the hangar where EO-234 was being built. Initially, this was designed with a crew enclosed in the fuselage behind a transparent nose, but this was quickly altered to a more solid nose with a more conventional canopy. The construction of the prototype began in March 1940, but work was cancelled again after the Battle of Dunkirk, when Lord Beaverbrook, as Minister of Aircraft Production, decided there was no production capacity for aircraft like the DH-98, which was not expected to be in service until early 1941. Although Lord Beaverbrook told Air Vice Marshal Freeman that work on the project had better stop, he did not issue a specific instruction, and Freeman ignored the request. In June 1940, however, Lord Beaverbrook and the Air Staff ordered that production was to focus on 5 existing types, namely the Supermarine Spitfire, Hawker Hurricane, Vickers Wellington, Armstrong Whitworth Whitley and the Bristol Blenheim. Work on the DH-98 prototype stopped, and it seemed that the project would be shut down when the design team were denied the materials with which to build their prototype. The Mosquito was only reinstated as a priority in July 1940, after de Havilland's general manager L.C.L. Murray promised Lord Beaverbrook 50 Mosquitoes by December 1941, and this, only after Beaverbrook was satisfied that Mosquito production would not hinder de Havilland's primary work of producing Tiger Moth and Oxford trainers and repairing Hurricanes as well as the license manufacture of Merlin engines. In promising Beaverbrook 50 Mosquitoes by the end of 1941, de Havilland was taking a gamble, because it was unlikely that 50 Mosquitoes could be built in such a limited time. As it transpired, only 20 Mosquitoes were built in 1941, but the other 30 were delivered by mid-March 1942. During the Battle of Britain, nearly a third of de Havilland's factory time was lost because the workers took cover in the factory's bomb shelters. Nevertheless, work on the prototype went quickly, such that EO-234 was rolled out on November 19, 1940. In the aftermath of the Battle of Britain, the original order was changed to 20 bomber variants and 30 fighters. It was still uncertain whether the fighter version should have dual or single controls, or should carry a turret, so 3 prototypes were eventually built, W4052, W4053 and W4073. The latter, both turret-armed, were later disarmed, to become the prototypes for the TA trainer. This caused some delays as half-built wing components had to be strengthened for the expected higher combat load requirements. The nose sections also had to be altered, omitting the clear perspex bomb aimer's position, to solid noses designed to house 4.303 machine guns and their ammunition. Prototypes and test flights. On November 3, 1940, the aircraft, still coded EO-234, was transported by road to Hatfield, and placed in a small blast-proof assembly building, where successful engine runs were made on November 19. 2 Merlin 21 2-speed single-stage supercharged engines were installed driving 3-bladed de Havilland Hydromatic constant-speed, controllable pitch propellers. EO-234 had a wingspan of 52 ft2 and was the only Mosquito to be built with Handley page slats on the outer leading edges of the wings. Test flights showed that these were not needed and they were disconnected and faired over with dope fabric. On November 24, 1940, taxiing trials were carried out by Geoffrey de Havilland, Jr., who was the company's chief test pilot and responsible for maiden flights. The tests were successful and the prototype was subsequently readied for flight testing, making its first flight piloted by Geoffrey de Havilland, on November 25. The flight was made 11 months after the start of detailed design work, a remarkable achievement considering the conditions of the time. For this maiden flight, EO-234, weighing 14,150 pounds, took off from a 450-foot field beside the shed. It was built in John E. Walker, chief engine installation designer, accompanied de Havilland. The takeoff was straightforward and easy, and the undercarriage was not retracted until a considerable height was obtained. The aircraft reached 220 mph, with the only problem being the undercarriage doors, which were operated by bungee cords attached to the main undercarriage legs, that remained open by some 12 inches at that speed. This problem persisted for some time. The left wing of EO-234 also had a tendency to drag to port slightly, so a rigging adjustment was carried out before further flights. On December 5, 1940, the prototype experienced tail buffeting at speeds between 240 miles per hour and 255 miles per hour. The pilot noticed this most in the control column, with handling becoming more difficult. During testing on December 10, wall tufts were attached to the suspect areas to investigate the direction of airflow. The conclusion was that the airflow separating from rear section of the inner engine nacelles was disturbed, leading to a localized stall, and the disturbed airflow was striking the tailplane, causing the buffeting. In an attempt to smooth the airflow and deflect it from striking the tailplane with such force, the company experimented with non-retractable slots, fitted to the inner engine nacelles and to the leading edge of the tailplane. These slots, and wing root fairings fitted to the forward fuselage and leading edge of the radiator intakes, stopped some of the vibration experienced by the pilot but failed to cure the tailplane buffeting. In February 1941, the buffeting was eliminated by incorporating triangular fillets on the trailing edge of the wings and lengthening the nacelles, the trailing edge of which curved up to fair into the fillet some 10 in behind the wing's trailing edge. This meant the flaps had to be divided into inboard and outboard sections. By January 1941, the prototype was carrying the military serial number W4050. With the buffeting problems largely resolved, John Cunningham flew W4050 on February 9, 1941. He was greatly impressed by the lightness of the controls and generally pleasant handling characteristics. Cunningham concluded that when the type was fitted with AI equipment, it would be a perfect replacement for the Bristol Beaufighter. During its trials on January 16, 1941, W4050 outpaced a Spitfire at 6,000 ft. The original estimates were that as the Mosquito prototype had twice the surface area and over twice the weight of the Spitfire Mk2, but also with twice its power, the Mosquito would end up being 20 miles per hour faster. Over the next few months, W4050 surpassed this estimate, easily beating the Spitfire Mk2 in testing at RAF Boscombe Down in February 1941, reaching a top speed of 392 miles per hour at 22,000 feet altitude, compared to a top speed of 360 miles per hour at 19,500 feet for the Spitfire. On February 19, official trials began at the Aeroplane and Armament Experimental Establishment based at Boscombe Down, although de Havilland's representative was surprised by a delay in starting the tests. On February 24, as W4050 taxied across the rough airfield, the tail wheel jammed leading to the fuselage fracturing. This was replaced by the fuselage of the photo-reconnaissance prototype W4051 in early March. In spite of this setback, the initial handling report 767 issued by the ANAE stated the aeroplane is pleasant to fly. Aileron control light and effective. The maximum speed reached was 388 mph at 22,000 ft. With an estimated maximum ceiling of 33,900 ft and a maximum rate of climb of 2,880 foot per minute at 11,400 ft. W4050 continued to be used for long and varied testing programs, being essentially the experimental workhorse for the Mosquito family. In late October 1941, it was taken back to the factory to be fitted with Merlin 61s, the first production Merlins fitted with a two-speed, two-stage supercharger. The first flight with the new engines was on June 20, 1942. W4050 recorded a maximum speed of 428 mph at 28,500 ft and 437 mph at 29,200 ft without snow guards. In October 1942, in connection with development work on the NFMK-15, W4050 was fitted with extended wingtips increasing the span to 59 ft in, first flying in this configuration on December 8. Finally, fitted with high-altitude rated two-stage, two-speed Merlin 77s, it reached 439 miles per hour in December 1943. Soon after these flights, W4050 was grounded and was scheduled to be scrapped, but instead continued to serve as an instructional airframe at Hatfield. In September 1958, W4050 was returned to the Salisbury Hall hangar in which it had been built, was restored to its original configuration and is now one of the primary exhibits of the de Havilland Aircraft Heritage Centre. W4051, which was designed from the outset to be the prototype for the photo-reconnaissance versions of the Mosquito, was slated to make its first flight in early 1941. However, the fuselage fracture in W4050 meant that W4051's fuselage was used as a replacement. W4051 was then rebuilt using a production standard fuselage and first flew on June 10, 1941. This prototype continued to use the short engine nacelles, single-piece trailing edge flaps and the 19 FT 5.5 and no-on tailplane used by W4050, but had production standard 54 FT2 in wings and, thus configured, became the only Mosquito prototype to fly operationally. Construction of the fighter prototype, W4052 was also carried out at the secret Salisbury Hall facility. The new prototype differed from its bomber brethren in a number of ways. It was powered by 1,460 HP Merlin 21s and had an altered canopy structure with a flat bulletproof windscreen. 420 Hispano Mk2 cannon were housed in a compartment under the cockpit floor, with the breeches projecting into the bomb bay. The bomb bay doors were replaced by manually operated bay doors which incorporated cartridge ejector chutes. The solid nose-mounted 4.303 and Browning machine guns and their ammunition boxes which were accessed by a single large, sideways hinged panel. In accordance with its role as a day-night fighter prototype, W4052 was equipped with AIMKIV equipment, complete with an arrowhead-shaped transmission aerial mounted between the central Brownings, and receiving aerials through each outer wingtip, and it was painted an overall black ADM2 a special night finish. It was also the first prototype constructed with the extended engine nacelles. W4052 was later tested with other modifications including bomb racks, drop tanks, barrage balloon cable cutters in the leading edge of the wings, Hamilton air screws and braking propellers, as well as drooping aileron systems which enabled steep approaches, and a larger rudder tab. The prototype continued to serve as a test machine until it was scrapped on January 28, 1946. W4055 flew the first operational Mosquito flight on September 17, 1941. During flight testing, the Mosquito prototypes were modified to test a number of experimental configurations. W4050 was fitted with a turret behind the cockpit for drag tests, after which the idea was abandoned in July 1941. W4052 had the first version of the Young Man frill air brake fitted to the fighter prototype. The frill was opened by bellows and venturi effect to provide rapid deceleration during interceptions and was tested between January-August 1942, but was also abandoned when it was discovered that lowering the undercarriage had the same effect with less buffeting. Early on in the Mosquito's operational life, the cooling intake shrouds that were to cool the exhausts on production aircraft overheated after a while. Flame dampers prevented exhaust glow on night operations, but they had an effect on performance. Multiple ejector and open-ended exhaust stubs helped solve the problem and were used in the PRV, BIX and BXVI variants. This increased speed performance in the BIX alone by 13 miles per hour. Production plans and American interest. The Air Ministry had authorized mass production plans to be drawn up on June 21, 1941, by which time the Mosquito had become one of the world's fastest operational aircraft. The Air Ministry ordered 19 photo-reconnaissance models and 176 fighters. A further 50 were unspecified. In July 1941, the Air Ministry confirmed these would be unarmed fast bombers. By the end of January 1942, contracts had been awarded for 1,378 Mosquitoes of all variants, including 20 TA trainers and 334 FBVI bombers. Another 400 were to be built by de Havilland Canada. On April 20, 1941, W4050 was demonstrated to Lord Beaverbrook, the Minister of Aircraft Production. The Mosquito made a series of flights, including one rolling climb on one engine. Also present were U.S. General Henry H. Arnold and his aide Major Elwood Quesada, who wrote I, recall the first time I saw the Mosquito as being impressed by its performance, which we were aware of. We were impressed by the appearance of the airplane that looks fast usually is fast, and the Mosquito was, by the standards of the time, an extremely well-streamlined airplane, and it was highly regarded, highly respected. The trials set up future production plans between Britain, Australia and Canada. The Americans did not pursue their interest. It was thought the Lockheed P-38 Lightning could handle the same duties just as easily. Arnold felt the design was being overlooked, and urged the strategic personalities in the United States Army Air Forces to learn from the design if they chose not to adopt it. Several days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the USAAF then requested one airframe to evaluate on December 12, 1941, signifying that the USAAF realized that they had entered the war without a fast dual-purpose reconnaissance aircraft. Design overview: the Mosquito was a fast, twin-engined aircraft with shoulder-mounted wings. The most produced variant, designated the FBMK-6, was powered by two Merlin Mk23 or Mk25 engines driving three-bladed de Havilland hydromatic propellers. The typical fixed armament for an FBMK-6 was 4 Browning .303 machine guns and 4 20-ohm Hispano cannon, while the offensive load consisted of up to 2,000 pounds of bombs, or 8 P-3 unguided rockets. Construction: the oval section fuselage was a frameless monocoque shell built in two halves being formed to shape by band clamps over a mahogany or concrete mold, each holding one half of the fuselage, split vertically. The shell halves were made of sheets of Ecuadorian balsa wood sandwiched between sheets of Canadian birch, but in areas needing extra strength such as a long cutout stronger woods replaced the balsa filler. The overall thickness of the birch and balsa sandwich skin was only 7/16 inch. This sandwich skin was so stiff that no internal reinforcement was necessary from the wing's rear spar to the tail-bearing bulkhead. The join was along the vertical center line. This split construction greatly aided the assembly of the internal equipment as it allowed the technicians easy access to the fuselage interior. While the glue in the plywood skin dried, carpenters cut a sawtooth joint into the edges of the fuselage shells, while other workers installed the controls and cabling on the inside wall. When the glue completely dried, the two halves were glued and screwed together. The fuselage was strengthened internally by 7 bulkheads made up of 2 plywood skins parted by spruce blocks, which formed the basis on each half for the outer shell. Each bulkhead was a repeat of the spruce design for the fuselage halves. A balsa sheet sandwiched between 2 plywood sheet skins. Bulkhead number 7 carried the fittings and loads for the tailplane and rudder. The type of glue originally used was casein, which was later replaced by aerolite, a synthetic urea formaldehyde, which was more durable. Many other types of screws and flanges also held the structure together. The fuselage construction joints were made from balsa wood and plywood strips, with the spruce multi-ply being connected by a balsa V-joint, along with the interior frame. The spruce would be reinforced by plywood strips at the point where the two halves joined to form the V-joint. Located on top of the joint, the plywood formed the outer skin. During the joining of the two halves, 2 laminated wooden clamps would be used in the after portion of the fuselage to act as support. A covering of doped madapolum fabric was stretched tightly over the shell and a coat of silver dope was applied, after which the exterior camouflage was applied. The fuselage had a large ventral section cut out, which was braced during construction, to allow it to be lowered onto the wing center section. Once the wing was secured, the lower panels were replaced, and the bomb bay or armament doors fitted. The Alward Wing was built as a one-piece structure and was not divided into separate construction sections. It was made up of 2 main spars, spruce and plywood compression ribs, stringers, and a plywood covering. The outer plywood skin was covered in dope like the fuselage. The wing was installed into the roots by means of 4 large attachment points. The engine radiators were fitted in the inner wing, just outboard of the fuselage on either side. These gave less drag. The radiators themselves were split into 3 sections, an oil cooler section outboard, the middle section forming the coolant radiator and the inboard section serving the cabin heater. The wing contained metal-framed and skinned ailerons, but the flaps were made of wood and were hydraulically controlled. The nacelles were mostly wood, although, for strength, the engine mounts were all metal as were the undercarriage parts. Engine mounts of welded steel tube were added, along with simple landing gear aleos filled with rubber blocks. Wood was used to carry only in plane loads, with metal fittings used for all triaxially loaded components such as landing gear, engine mounts, control surface mounting brackets, and the wing-to-fuselage junction. The outer leading wing edge had to be brought 22 inches further forward to accommodate this design. The main tail unit was all wood-built. The control surfaces, the rudder and elevator, were aluminium-framed and fabric-covered. The total weight of metal castings and forgings used in the aircraft was only 280 lb. In November 1944, several crashes occurred in the Far East. At first, it was thought these were as a result of wing structure failures. The casein glue, it was said, cracked when exposed to extreme heat and/or monsoon conditions. This caused the upper surfaces to lift from the main spar. An investigating team led by Major Havilland de Havilland traveled to India and produced a report in early December 1944 stating that the accidents were not caused by the deterioration of the glue but by shrinkage of the airframe during the wet monsoon season. However, a later inquiry by Cabot and Myers definitely attributed the accidents to faulty manufacture, and this was confirmed by a further investigation team by the Ministry of Aircraft Production at Deptford, which found faults in 6 different marks of Mosquito which showed similar defects, and none of the aircraft had been exposed to monsoon conditions or termite attack. Thus it was concluded that there were construction defects found at the 2 plants. It was found that the standard of gluing left much to be desired. Records at the time showed that accidents caused by loss of control were 3 times more frequent on Mosquitoes than on any other type of aircraft. The Air Ministry forestalled any loss of confidence in the Mosquito by holding to Major de Havilland's initial investigation in India that the accidents were caused largely by climate. To solve the problem, a sheet of plywood was set along the span of the wing to seal the entire length of the skin joint along the main spar. Systems. The fuel systems allowed the Mosquito to have a good range and endurance, using up to 9 fuel tanks. 2 outer wing tanks each contain 58 imperial gallons of fuel. These were complemented by 2 inner wing fuel tanks, each containing 143 imperial gallons, located between the wing root and engine nacelle. In the central fuselage were twin fuel tanks mounted between bulkhead number 2 and 3 aft of the cockpit. In the FBVI, these tanks contain 25 imperial gallons each, while in the BIV and other unarmed Mosquitoes each of the 2 center tanks contains 68 imperial gallons. Both the inner wing and fuselage tanks are listed as the main tanks, and the total internal fuel load of 452 imperial gallons was initially deemed appropriate for the type. In addition, the FBMK-6 could have larger fuselage tanks, increasing the capacity to 63 imperial gallons. Drop tanks of 50 imperial gallons or 100 imperial gallons could be mounted under each wing, increasing the total fuel load to 615 or 715 imperial gallons. In order to reduce fuel vaporization at the high altitudes at which the photographic reconnaissance variants flew, the central and inner wing tanks were pressurized. The pressure venting cock located behind the pilot's seat controlled a pressure valve. As the altitude increased, the valve increased the volume applied by a pump. This system was extended to include field modifications of the fuel tank system. The engine oil tanks were in the engine nacelles. Each nacelle contained a 15 imperial gallons oil tank, including a 2.5 imperial airspace. The oil tanks themselves had no separate coolant controlling systems. The coolant header tank was in the forward nacelle, behind the propeller. The remaining coolant systems were controlled by the coolant radiators shutters in the forward inner wing compartment, between the nacelle and the fuselage and behind the main engine cooling radiators which were fitted in the leading edge. Electric pneumatic-operated radiator shutters directed and controlled airflow through the ducts and into the coolant valves, to predetermine temperatures. Electrical power came from a 24-volt DC generator on the starboard engine and an alternator on the port engine which supplied AC power for radios. The radio shutters, superchargers, gun camera, bomb bay, bomb rocket release and all the other crew-controlled instruments were powered by a 24-volt battery. The radio communication devices included VHF and HF communications, G navigation, and IFF and GP devices. The electric generators also powered the fire extinguishers. Located on the starboard side of the cockpit, the switches would operate automatically in the event of a crash. In flight, a warning light would flash to indicate a fire, should the pilot not already be aware of it. In later models, to save liquids and engine cleanup time in case of belly landing, the fire extinguisher was changed to semi-automatic triggers. The design of the Mark VI allowed for a provisional long-range fuel tank to increase range for action over enemy territory, for the installation of bomb release equipment specific for depth charges for strikes against enemy shipping, or for the simultaneous use of rocket projectiles along with a 100 imperial gallons drop tank under each wing supplementing the main fuel cells. The FBVI had a wingspan of 54 feet 2 inches, a length of 41 feet 2 inches. It had a maximum speed of 378 miles per hour at 13,200 feet. Maximum takeoff weight was 22,300 pounds and the range of the aircraft was 1,120 miles with a service ceiling of 26,000 feet. The main landing gear were housed in the nacelles behind the engines. These were raised and lowered hydraulically. The main landing gear shock absorbers were de Havilland manufactured and used a system of rubber and compression, rather than hydraulic aleos, with twin pneumatic brakes for each wheel. The Dunlop Marstrand anti-shimmy tailwheel was retractable. Flight characteristics: the design was noted for having light and effective control surfaces which allowed for good maneuverability. It was noted that the rudder should not be used aggressively at high speeds, and the poor aileron control at low speeds when landing and taking off was also a problem for inexperienced crews. For flying at low speeds, the flaps had to be set at 15 degree, speed reduced to 201 miles per hour and RPM set to 2,650. The speed could be reduced to an acceptable 150 miles per hour for low-speed flying. For cruising, the maximum speed for obtaining maximum range was 200 miles per hour at 17,000 lb weight. The Mosquito had a low stall speed of 121 miles per hour with undercarriage and flaps raised. When both were lowered, the stall speed decreased to 120 miles per hour. Stall speed at normal approach angle and conditions was 109 miles per hour. Warning of the stall was given by buffeting and would occur 12 miles per hour before stall was reached. The conditions and impact of the stall were not severe. The wing did not drop unless the control column was pulled back. The nose drooped gently and recovery was easy. Variants: until the end of 1942 the RAF always used Roman numerals for mark numbers. 1943 to 1948 was a transition period during which new aircraft entering service were given Arabic numerals for mark numbers, but older aircraft retained their Roman numerals. From 1948 onwards, Arabic numerals were used exclusively. Prototypes: 3 prototypes were built, each with a different configuration. The first to fly was W4050 on November 25, 1940. Followed by the fighter W4052 on May 15, 1941 and the photo-reconnaissance prototype W4051 on June 10, 1941. W4051 later flew operationally with one photographic reconnaissance unit. Photo reconnaissance, media related to de Havilland Mosquito Prairie at Wikimedia Commons. A total of 10 Mosquito Prairie Mks were built. 4 of them long-range versions equipped with a 151 imperial gallons overload fuel tank in the fuselage. The contract called for 10 of the PRMKI airframes to be converted to BMK-4 Series 1s. All of the PRMKIs, and the BMK-4 Series 1s, had the original short-engine nacelles and short-span tailplanes. Their engine cowlings incorporated the original pattern of integrated exhaust manifolds which, after a relatively brief flight time, had a troublesome habit of burning and blistering the cowling panels. The first operational sortie by a Mosquito was made by a PRMKI, W4055, on September 17, 1941. During this sortie the unarmed Mosquito PRI evaded three Messerschmitt Bf-109s at 23,000 feet. Powered by two Merlin 21s, the PRMKI had a maximum speed of 382 miles per hour, a cruise speed of 255 miles per hour, a ceiling of 35,000 feet, a range of 2,180 nautical miles, and a climb rate of 2,850 feet per minute. Over 30 Mosquito BMK-4 bombers were converted into the PRMK-4 photo-reconnaissance aircraft. The first operational flight by a PRMK-4 was made by DK-284 in April 1942. The Mosquito Prairie Mk, built as a stopgap pending the introduction of the refined PRMK-9, was the next photo-reconnaissance version. The 5 VIIs were converted from BMK-IVs and became the first operational Mosquito version to be powered by two-stage, two-speed supercharged engines, using 1,565 HP Rolls-Royce Merlin 61 engines in place of Merlin 21/22s. The first PRMK-8, DK-324 first flew on October 20, 1942. The Prairie Mk8 had a maximum speed of 436 mph, an economical cruise speed of 295 mph at 20,000 ft, and 350 mph at 30,000 ft, a ceiling of 38,000 ft, a range of 2,550 nmi, and a climb rate of 2,500 ft per minute. The Mosquito Prairie Mk9, 90 of which were built, was the first Mosquito variant with two-stage, two-speed engines to be produced in quantity. The first of these, LR405, first flew in April 1943. The Prairie Mk9 was based on the Mosquito BMK-9 bomber and was powered by two 1,680 HP Merlin 72/73 or 76/77 engines. It could carry either two 50 imperial gallons, two 100 imperial gallons or two 200 imperial gallons droppable fuel tanks. The Mosquito Prairie Mk16 had a pressurized cockpit and, like the Mk9, was powered by two Rolls-Royce Merlin 72/73 or 76/77 piston engines. This version was equipped with three overload fuel tanks, totaling 760 imperial gallons in the bomb bay, and could also carry 250 imperial gallons or 100 imperial gallons drop tanks. A total of 435 of the PRMK-16 were built. The Prairie Mk16 had a maximum speed of 415 mph, a cruise speed of 250 mph, ceiling of 38,500 ft, a range of 2,450 nmi, and a climb rate of 2,900 feet per minute. The Mosquito Prairie Mk32 was a long-range, high-altitude, pressurized photo-reconnaissance version. It was powered by a pair of two-stage supercharged 1,960 HP Rolls-Royce Merlin 113 and Merlin 114 piston engines, the Merlin 113 on the starboard side and the Merlin 114 on the port. First flown in August 1944, only 5 were built and all were conversions from PRXVIS. The Mosquito Prairie Mk34 and PRMK34A was a very long-range unarmed high-altitude photo-reconnaissance version. The fuel tank and cockpit protection armor were removed. Additional fuel was carried in a bulged bomb bay, 1,192 gallons which was the equivalent of 5,419 miles. A further two 200-gallon drop tanks under the outer wings gave a range of 3,600 miles cruising at 300 mph. Powered by two 1,690 HP Merlin 114s first used in the PR-32. The Port Merlin 114 drove a Marshall cabin supercharger. A total of 181 were built, including 50 built by Percival Aircraft Company at Luton. The Prairie 34's maximum speed was 335 mph at sea level, 405 mph at 17,000 ft and 425 mph at 30,000 ft. All Prairie 34s were installed with 4 split F-52 vertical cameras, 2 forward, 2 aft of the fuselage tank and 1 F-24 oblique camera. Sometimes a K-17 camera was used for air surveys. In August 1945, the PR-34A was the final photo reconnaissance variant with 1 Merlin 113A and 114A each delivering 1,710 HP. Colonel Roy M. Stanley II, USAF wrote, "I consider the Mosquito the best photo reconnaissance aircraft of the war." After the end of World War II, Spartan Air Services used 10 XRAF Mosquitoes, mostly B-35s plus one of only 6 PR-35s built, for high-altitude photographic survey work in Canada. Bombers, media related to de Havilland Mosquito be at Wikimedia Commons. On June 21, 1941, the Air Ministry ordered that the last 10 Mosquitoes, ordered as photo reconnaissance aircraft, should be converted to bombers. These 10 aircraft were part of the original March 1, 1940 production order and became the BMK-4 Series 1. W-4052 was to be the prototype and flew for the first time on September 8, 1941. The bomber prototype led to the BMK-4, of which 273 were built. Apart from the 10 Series 1s, all of the rest were built as Series 2s with extended nacelles, revised exhaust manifolds, with integrated flame dampers, and larger tailplanes. Series 2 bombers also differed from the Series 1 in having a larger bomb bay to increase the payload to 4 500 lb bombs, instead of the 4 250-pound bombs of Series 1. This was made possible by shortening the tail of the 500-pound bomb so that these 4 larger weapons could be carried total load. The BMK-4 entered service in May 1942 with 105 Squadron. In April 1943 it was decided to convert a BMK-4 to carry a 4,000 lb, thin-cased high-explosive bomb. The conversion, including modified bomb bay suspension arrangements, bulged bomb bay doors and fairings, was relatively straightforward, and 54 BIVs were subsequently modified and distributed to squadrons of RAF Bomber Command's Light Night Striking Force. 27 BMK-IVs were later converted for special operations with the highball anti-shipping weapon, and were used by 618 Squadron, formed in April 1943 specifically to use this weapon. A BMK-4, DK-290 was initially used as a trials aircraft for the bomb, followed by DZ-471,530 and 533. The BMK-4 had a maximum speed of 380 mph, a cruising speed of 265 mph, ceiling of 34,000 ft, a range of 2,040 nm, and a climb rate of 2,500 ft per minute. Other bomber variants of the Mosquito included the Merlin 21-powered BMK-V high-altitude version. Trials with this configuration were made with W-4057, which had the wings strengthened and an addition of 2 fuel tanks, or alternatively 2 500-pound bombs. This design was not produced in Britain, but formed the basic design of the Canadian-built BV. Only W-4057 was built in prototype form. The Merlin 31-powered BMK-7 was built by de Havilland Canada. It was based on the BV and first flown on September 24, 1942. It only saw service in Canada and only 25 were built. 6 were handed over to the United States Army Air Forces. BMK-9 was powered by the Merlin 72, 73, 76 or 77. The 2-stage Merlin variant was based on the PRIX. The prototype DK-324 was converted from a PRV and first flew on March 24, 1943. In October 1943 it was decided that all BMK-IVs and all BMK-IXs then in service would be converted to carry the 4,000-pound cookie, and all BMK-IXs built after that date were designed to allow them to be converted to carry the weapon. The BMK-9 had a maximum speed of 408 mph. An economical cruise speed of 295 mph at 20,000 ft, and 350 mph at 30,000 ft, ceiling of 36,000 ft, a range of 2,450 nm, and a climb rate of 2,850 feet per minute. The 9 could carry a maximum load of 2,000 €4,000 lb of bombs. A Mosquito BMK-9 holds the record for the most combat operations flown by an Allied bomber in the Second World War. LR-503, known as F for Freddy, first served with No. 109 and subsequently, No. 105 RAF squadrons. It flew 213 sorties during the war, only to crash at Calgary Airport during the 8th Victory Lone Bomb Drive on May 10, 1945, 2 days after Victory in Europe Day, killing both the pilot, FLT. Lieutenant Morris Briggs, DSO, DFC, DFM and Navigator FL. Off. John Baker, DFC and BAR. The BMK-16 was powered by the same variations as the BIX. All BMK-XVIs were capable of being converted to carry the 4,000-pound cookie. The two-stage power plants were added along with a pressurized cabin. DZ-540 first flew on January 1, 1944. The prototype was converted from a 4. The next variant, the BMK-20, was powered by Packard Merlins 31 and 33. It was the Canadian version of the IV. Altogether, 245 were built. The BMK-16 had a maximum speed of 408 mph, an economical cruise speed of 295 mph at 20,000 aft, and 350 mph at 30,000 aft, ceiling of 37,000 aft, a range of 1,485 nmi, and a climb rate of 2,800 aft per minute. The type could carry 4,000 pounds of bombs. The B-35 was powered by Merlin 113 and 114 as. Some were converted to TT-35s and others were used as PO-35s. The B-35 had a maximum speed of 422 mph, a cruising speed of 276 mph, ceiling of 42,000 aft, a range of 1,750 nmi, and a climb rate of 2,700 aft per minute. A total of 174 B-35s were delivered up to the end of 1945. A further 100 were delivered from 1946 for a grand total of 274, 65 of which were built by Airspeed Limited. Fighters, media related to de Havilland Mosquito F at Wikimedia Commons. Developed during 1940, the first prototype of the Mosquito Mk2 was completed on May 15, 1941. These Mosquitoes were fitted with 420 Hispano cannon in the fuselage belly and 4.303 Browning machine guns mounted in the nose. On production MKIs, the machine guns and ammunition tanks were accessed via two centrally hinged, sideways opening doors in the upper nose section. To arm and service the cannon, the bomb bay doors were replaced by manually operated bay doors. The F and NF MKIs could not carry bombs. The type was also fitted with a gun camera in a compartment above the machine guns in the nose and was fitted with exhaust flame dampers to reduce the glare from the Merlin XXs. In August 1942, Britain experienced several incursions of high-altitude Luftwaffe bombers, including the Junkers Ju-86P. As a result of these raids, starting in September 1942, 5 Mosquito BMK-4 bombers were quickly converted into FMK-15 high-altitude, pressurized fighters, powered by two-stage Merlin 73s and 77s fitted with four-bladed propellers. The first of these conversions was MP-469, which was wheeled into the experimental shop on September 7 and first flew on September 14. The bomber nose forward of the cockpit was cut off and a standard fighter nose, complete with 4.303 Brownings, grafted on in its place. The pressurized crew cabin retained the bomber's canopy structure, with a V-shaped, two-piece windscreen, while the bomber's control wheel was replaced by the fighter's control stick. Extended, pointed, wingtips increased the wingspan to 59 aft. The airframe was lightened by removing all armor plating, bullet-proofing from the fuel and oil tanks, and the outer wing and fuselage tanks. Other ancillary equipment was also removed, and smaller diameter main wheels were fitted after the first few flights. At a loaded weight of 16,200 lb, the Mk-15 was 2,300 lb lighter than a standard Mk2, and reached an altitude of 45,000 feet. 4 more BMK-IVs were converted into FMK-XVs, and, in late 1942, were further modified to become NFMK-XVs. All fighters and fighter bombers, apart from the FMK-15, featured a modified canopy structure incorporating a flat, single-piece armored windscreen, and the crew entry-exit door was moved from the bottom of the forward fuselage to the right side of the nose, just forward of the wing leading edge. The pilot was provided with a fighter-style control stick rather than a wheel. Night fighters, media related to de Havilland Mosquito NF at Wikimedia Commons. At the end of 1940, the Air Staff's preferred night fighter design was the Gloucester F-18/40. However, although in agreement as to the quality of the Gloucester Company's design, the Ministry of Aircraft Production was concerned that Gloucester would not be able to work on the F-18/40 and also the jet fighter design, considered the greater priority. Consequently, in mid-1941 the Air Staff and MAP agreed that the Gloucester aircraft would be dropped and the Mosquito considered for the night fighter requirement instead. The first production night fighter Mosquitoes were designated NFMK-2. A total of 466 were built, with the first entering service with No. 157 Squadron in January 1942, replacing the Douglas Havoc. These aircraft were similar to the FMK-2, but were fitted with the AIMK-4 metric wavelength radar. The herringbone transmitting antenna was mounted on the nose and the dipole receiving antennae were carried under the outer wings. A number of NFIs had their radar equipment removed and additional fuel tanks installed in the bay behind the cannon for use as night intruders. These aircraft, designated NF-2, were first used by 23 Squadron in operations over Europe in 1942. 23 Squadron was then deployed to Malta on December 20, 1942, and operated against targets in Italy. 97 NFMKIs were upgraded with cent-metric AIMK-8 radar and these were designated NFMK-12. The NFMK-13, of which 270 were built, was the production equivalent of the Mk-12 conversions. The cent-metric radar sets were mounted in a solid thimble, or universal bull-nose radome, which required the machine guns to be dispensed with. 4 FMK-XVs were converted to the NFMK-15. These were fitted with AIMK-8 in a thimble radome, and the .303 Brownings were moved into a gun pack fitted under the forward fuselage. NFMK-17 was the designation for 99 Nanafords Mk2 conversions, with single-stage Merlin 21, 22, or 23 engines, but British AIX radar. The NFMK-19 was an improved version of the NF-13. It could be fitted with American or British AI radars. 220 were built. The NFMK-30 was the final wartime variant and was a high-altitude version, powered by two 1,710 HP Rolls-Royce Merlin 76s. The NFMK-30 had a maximum speed of 424 mph at 26,500 ft. It also carried early electronic countermeasures equipment. 526 were built. Other Mosquito night fighter variants which were planned for, but never built, included the NFMK-10 and NFMK-14, both of which were to have two-stage Merlins. The NFMK-31 was a variant of the NFMK-30, but powered by Packard Merlins. Mosquito night intruders of 100 Group, Bomber Command, were also fitted with a device called Serrate to allow them to track down German night fighters from their Liechtenstein BC and SN2 radar emissions, as well as a device named Perfettos that tracked German IFF signals. After the war, two more night fighter versions were developed. The NFMK-36 was similar to the Mosquito NFMK-30, but fitted with the American-built AIMK-X radar. Powered by two 1,690 HP Rolls-Royce Merlin 113/114 piston engines. 266 built. Max level speeds with flame dampers fitted were 305 mph at sea level, 380 mph at 17,000 ft, and 405 mph at 30,000 ft. The NFMK-38, 101 of which were built, was also similar to the Mosquito NFMK-30, but fitted with the British-built AIMK-9 radar. This variant suffered from stability problems and did not enter RAF service. 60 were eventually sold to Yugoslavia. According to the pilot's notes and Air Ministry Special Flying Instruction TF/487, which posted limits on the Mosquito's maximum speeds, the NFMK-38 had a VNE of 370 knots, without underwing stalls, and within the altitude range of sea level to 10,000 AFT. However, from 10,000 to 15,000 AFT the maximum speed was 348 knots. As the height increased, other recorded speeds were 15,000 to 20,000 AFT 320 knots, 20,000 to 25,000 AFT 295 knots, 25,000 to 30,000 AFT 260 knots, 30,000 to 35,000 AFT 235 knots. With two added 100-gallon fuel tanks, this performance fell between sea level and 15,000 feet 330 knots. Between 15,000 to 20,000 AFT 320 knots. 20,000 to 25,000 AFT 295 knots. 25,000 to 30,000 AFT 260 knots. 30,000 to 35,000 AFT 235 knots. Little difference was noted above 15,000 AFT. Fighter bombers. The FBMK-6, which first flew on June 1, 1942, was powered by two 1,460 HP Merlin 21s or 1,635 HP Merlin 25s, and introduced a re-stressed and reinforced basic wing structure capable of carrying single 250-pound or 500-pound bombs on racks housed in streamlined fairings under each wing, or up to 8 RP-3 25-pounds or 60-pounds rockets. In addition, fuel lines were added to the wings to enable single 50 mpg or 100 mpg drop tanks to be carried under each wing. The usual fixed armament was 420 Hispano MKII cannon and 4.303 Browning machine guns, while two 250-pound or 500-pound bombs could be carried in the bomb bay. Unlike the FMK-2, the ventral bay doors were split into two pairs, with the forward pair being used to access the cannon, while the rear pair acted as bomb bay doors. The maximum fuel load which could be carried was 719.5 imperial gallons distributed between 453 imperial gallons internal fuel tanks, plus two overload tanks, each of 66.5 imperial gallons capacity, which could be fitted in the bomb bay, and two 100 imperial gallons drop tanks. All-out level speed is often given as 368 mph. Although this speed applies to aircraft fitted with saxophone exhausts. The test aircraft fitted with stub exhausts was found to be performing below expectations. It was returned to de Havilland at Hatfield where it was serviced. Its top speed was then tested and found to be 384 mph, in line with expectations. 2,298 FBMK Vista were built, nearly one-third of Mosquito production. 18 built by Airspeed Limited were eventually modified to become FBX-VIIIS. 2 were converted to TR-33 carrier-borne, maritime strike prototypes. The FBMK-6 proved capable of holding its own with single-engine fighter aircraft in addition to bombing. For example, on January 15, 1945, Mosquito FBMK Vista of 143 Squadron were engaged by 30 Focke-Wulf FW-190s from Jagdgeschwader 5. Nonetheless, the Mosquitoes sank an armed trawler and 2 merchant ships, losing 5 Mosquitoes but shooting down 5 FW-190s. Another fighter-bomber variant was the Mosquito FBMK-18, of which 18 were purpose-built and 27 converted from Mk Vista. The Mk-18 was armed with a Merlin 6-pounder Class M cannon. This was a modified QF 6-pounder anti-tank gun fitted with an auto-loader to allow both semi or fully automatic fire. 25 rounds were carried, with the entire installation weighing 1,580 lb. In addition, 900 lb of armor was added within the engine cowlings, around the nose and under the cockpit floor to protect the engines and crew from the heavily armed U-boats which were intended to be the primary target of the Mk-18. Two 4.303 Browning machine guns were retained in the nose and were used to sight the main weapon onto the target. The Air Ministry initially suspected that this variant would not work, but tests proved otherwise. Although the gun provided the Mosquito with yet more anti-shipping firepower for use against U-boats, it required a steady approach run to aim and fire the gun, making it vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. The gun had a muzzle velocity of 2,950 foot per second and an excellent range of some 1,800 to 1,500 yards. It was sensitive to sidewards movement. An attack required a dive from 5,000 aft at a 30° angle with the turn and bank indicator on center. A move during the dive could jam the gun. The prototype HJ732 was converted from an FPVI and was first flown on June 8, 1943. The effect of the new weapon was demonstrated on March 10, 1944 when MKXVIIs from 248 Squadron engaged a German convoy of 1 U-boat and 4 destroyers, protected by 10 Ju-88s. 3 of the Ju-88s were shot down. Pilot Tony Phillips destroyed 1 Ju-88 with 4 shells, one of which tore an engine off the Ju-88. The U-boat was damaged. On March 25, U-976 was sunk by Mullins-equipped Mosquitoes. On June 10, U-821 was abandoned in the face of intense air attack from No. 248 Squadron, and was later sunk by a Liberator of No. 206 Squadron. On April 5, 1945 Mosquitoes with Mullins attacked 5 German surface ships in the Kattegat and again demonstrated their value by setting them all on fire and sinking them. A German spar breacher was lost with all hands, with some 200 bodies being recovered by Swedish vessels. Some 900 German soldiers died in total. On April 9, German U-boats U-804, U-843 and U-1065 were spotted in formation heading for Norway. All were sunk. U-251 and U-2359 followed on April 19 and May 2, 1945. Despite the preference for rockets, a further development of the large gun idea was carried out using the even larger QF 32-pounder, a gun based on the QF 3.7-inch AA gun designed for tank use, the airborne version using a novel form of muzzle brake. Developed to prove the feasibility of using such a large weapon in the Mosquito, this installation was not completed until after the war, when it was flown and fired in a single aircraft without problems, then scrapped. Designs based on the Mk6 were the FBMK-26, built in Canada, and the FBMK-40, built in Australia, powered by Packard Merlins. The FB-26 improved from the FB-21 using 1,620 HP single-stage Packard Merlin 225s. Some 300 were built and another 37 converted to T-29 standard. 212 FB-40s were built by de Havilland Australia. 6 were converted to PR-40. 28 to PR-41s, 1 to FB-42 and 22 to T-43s tactical assault aircraft. Most were powered by Packard-built Merlin 31 or 33. Trainers, the Mosquito was also built as the Mosquito TMK-3 two-seat trainer. This version, powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin 21s, was unarmed and had a modified cockpit fitted with dual control arrangements. A total of 348 of the TMK-3 were built for the RAF and Fleet Air Arm de Havilland Australia built 11 TMK-43 trainers, similar to the Mk3. Torpedo bombers, to meet specification N15/44 for a navalized Mosquito for Royal Navy use as a torpedo bomber, de Havilland produced a carrier-borne variant. A Mosquito FPVI was modified as a prototype designated Sea Mosquito Trail Mk33 with folding wings, arrestor hook, thimble nose radome, Merlin 25 engines with 4-bladed propellers and a new Leo pneumatic landing gear rather than the standard rubber and compression gear. Initial carrier tests of the Sea Mosquito were carried out by Eric Winkle-Brown aboard HMS Indefatigable, the first landing on taking place on March 25, 1944. An order for 100 TR-33s was placed although only 50 were built at Leavesden. Armament was 420 ohm cannon, 2 500 LB bombs in the bomb bay, 8 60 LB rockets and a standard torpedo under the fuselage. The first production TR-33 flew on November 10, 1945. This series was followed by 6 Mosquito Trail Mk-37s, which differed in having ASV Mk-13 radar instead of the TR-33's ANAPS-6. Target tugs. The Royal Navy also operated the Mosquito TT Mk-39 for target towing. A number of BMK-XVI's bombers were converted into TT Mk-39 target tug aircraft. The RAF's target tug version was the Mosquito TT Mk-35, which were the last aircraft to remain in operational service, with no 3 CAACU at Exeter, finally being retired in 1963. 2 ex-RAF FB-6s were converted to TT-6 standard at Manchester Airport by Fanny Aviation in 1953 1954, being delivered to the Belgian Air Force for use as towing aircraft from the silt firing ranges. Canadian-built. A total of 1,133 Mosquitoes were built by de Havilland Canada at Downsview Airfield in Downsview, Ontario. Mosquito BMK-VI, a Canadian version based on the Mosquito BMK-V bomber aircraft. Powered by two 1,418 HP Packard Merlin 31 piston engines. 25 built. Mosquito BMK-XX, a Canadian version of the Mosquito BMK-4 bomber aircraft. 145 built, of which 40 were converted into F-8 photo-reconnaissance aircraft for the USAAF. Mosquito FBMK-21, a Canadian version of the Mosquito FBMK-6 fighter bomber aircraft. Powered by two 1,460 HP Rolls-Royce Merlin 31 piston engines, 3 built. Mosquito TMK-22, a Canadian version of the Mosquito TMK-3 training aircraft. Mosquito BMK-23, unused designation for a bomber variant. Mosquito FBMK-24, a Canadian fighter bomber version. Powered by two 1,620 HP Rolls-Royce Merlin 301 piston engines. 2 built. Mosquito BMK-25, an improved version of the Mosquito BMK-20 bomber aircraft. Powered by two 1,620 HP Packard Merlin 225 piston engines. 400 built. Mosquito FBMK-26, an improved version of the Mosquito FBMK-21 fighter bomber aircraft. Powered by two 1,620 HP Packard Merlin 225 piston engines. 338 built. Mosquito TMK-27, a Canadian-built training aircraft. Mosquito TMK-29, a number of FBMK-26 fighters were converted into TMK-29 trainers. Australian-built. Mosquito FBMK-40, a 2-seat fighter bomber version for the RAAF. Powered by two 1,460 HP Rolls-Royce Merlin 31 piston engines. A total of 178 built in Australia. Mosquito Prairie Mk. This designation was given to 6 FBMK-40s, which were converted into photo-reconnaissance aircraft. Mosquito FBMK-41, a 2-seat fighter bomber version for the RAAF. A total of 11 were built in Australia. Mosquito Prairie Mk-41, a 2-seat photo survey version for the RAAF. A total of 17 were built in Australia. Mosquito FBMK-42, a 2-seat fighter bomber version. Powered by two Rolls-Royce Merlin 69 piston engines. 1 FBMK-40 aircraft was converted into a Mosquito FBMK-42. Mosquito TMK-43, a 2-seat training version for the RAAF. A total of 11 FBMK-40s were converted into Mosquito TMK-43s. Highball. A number of Mosquito OVs were modified by Vickers Armstrongs to carry highball bouncing bombs, and were allocated Vickers type numbers, Type 463, prototype highball conversion of Mosquito Ford DZ741. Type 465, conversion of 33 Mosquito OVs to carry highball. Production details. In England, fuselage shells were mainly made by furniture companies, including Ronson, Egom, Parker Nolan Stiles and Mealing. Some of the specialized wood veneer used in the construction of the Mosquito was made by Rodis Manufacturing in Marshfield, Wisconsin, United States. Hamilton Rodders had teams of young women ironing the strongwood veneer before shipping to the UK. Wing spars were made by J.B. Heath and Dancer and Ian. Many of the other parts, including flaps, flap shrouds, fins, leading edge assemblies and bomb doors were also produced in High Wycombe, Buckinghamshire, which was well suited to these tasks because of a well-established furniture manufacturing industry. Dancer and Ian processed much of the wood from start to finish, receiving timber and transforming it into finished wing spars at their High Wycombe factory. About 5,000 of the 7,781 Mosquitoes made contained parts made in High Wycombe. In Canada, fuselages were built in the Oshawa, Ontario plant of General Motors of Canada Limited. These were shipped to de Havilland Canada in Toronto for mating to fuselages and completion. As a secondary manufacturer, de Havilland Australia started construction in Sydney. These production lines added 1,133 from Canada and 212 from Australia. Total Mosquito production was 7,781, of which 6,710 were built during the war. The ferry operation of the Mosquito from Canada to the war front was problematic, as a small fraction of the aircraft mysteriously disappeared over mid-Atlantic. The theory of auto-explosion was offered, and, although a considerable effort by de Havilland Canada to resolve production problems with engine and oil systems reduced the number of aircraft lost, the actual cause of the losses was never established. The company introduced an additional 5 hours flight testing to clear production aircraft before the ferry flight. By the end of the war, nearly 500 Mosquito bombers and fighter bombers had been delivered successfully by the Canadian operation. In total, both during the war and after, de Havilland exported 46 FPVs and 29 PRXVIs to Australia, 2 FPVI and 18 nanophorids 30s to Belgium, approximately 205 FB-26, T-29 and T-27s to nationalist China, 19 FPVs to Czechoslovakia in 1948, 6 FPVs to Dominica, a few BIVs, 57 FPVs, 29 PRXVIS and 23 NFXXXS to France. Some Telias were exported to Israel along with 60 FPVs, and at least 5 PRXVIS and 14 naval versions. 4 Telias, 76 FPVs, 1 FB-40 and 4 T-43s were exported to New Zealand. 3 Telias were exported to Norway, and 18 FPVs which were later converted to night fighter standard. South Africa received 2 FII and 14 PRXVIs and Sweden received 46 NFXs. Turkey received 96 FPVs and several Telias, and Yugoslavia had 60 nanophorids 38s, 80 FPVs and 3 Telias delivered. Sites. Operational history. The de Havilland Mosquito operated in many roles during the Second World War, being tasked to perform medium bomber, reconnaissance, tactical strike, anti-submarine warfare and shipping attack and night fighter duties, both defensive and offensive, until the end of the war. In July 1941, the first production Mosquito W4051 was sent to No. 1 Photographic Reconnaissance Unit, operating at the time at RAF Benson. Consequently, the secret reconnaissance flights of this aircraft were the first active service missions of the Mosquito. In 1944, the journal flight gave September 19, 1941 as date of the first PR mission, at an altitude of some 20,000 ft. On November 15, 1941, 105 Squadron, RAF, took delivery of the first operational Mosquito Mk. BIV bomber, serial No. W4064. Throughout 1942, 105 SDN, based at RAF Horsham Street Faith, then from September 29, RAF Mayhem, undertook daylight low-level and shallow dive attacks. Apart from the famous Oslo raid, these were mainly on industrial targets and occupied Netherlands, plus northern and western Germany. The crews faced deadly flak and fighters, particularly FW-190, a Euro unregistered trademark S, which they called a Euro snap as a Euro Germany still controlled continental airspace, and the FW-190, a Euro unregistered trademark S, were often already airborne and at an advantageous altitude. It was the Mosquito Euro unregistered trademark's excellent handling capabilities, rather than pure speed, that facilitated those evasions that were successful. During this daylight raiding phase, aircrew losses were higher even the losses incurred in the Squadrone Euro unregistered trademark's dangerous Blenheim era were exceeded in percentage terms. The Roll of Honour shows 51 aircrew deaths from the end of May 1942 to April 1943. In the corresponding period, crews gained 3 mentions in dispatches, 2 DFMA Euro unregistered trademark S and 3 DFCA Euro unregistered trademark S. The Mosquito was first announced publicly on September 26, 1942 after the Oslo Mosquito raid of September 25. It was featured in the Times on the 28th September, and the next day the newspaper published 2 captioned photographs illustrating the bomb strikes and damage. Mosquitoes were widely used by the RAF Pathfinder Force, marking targets for the main nighttime strategic bombing force, as well as flying nuisance raids in which Mosquitoes often dropped 4,000 lb cookies. Despite an initially high loss rate, the Mosquito ended the war with the lowest losses of any aircraft in RAF Bomber Command service. Post-war, the RAF found that when finally applied to bombing, in terms of useful damage done, the Mosquito has proved 4.95 times cheaper than the Lancaster. In April 1943, in response to political humiliation caused by the Mosquito, Hermann Gar Paragraph Ring ordered the formation of special Luftwaffe units to combat the Mosquito attacks, though these units, which were little more than glorified squadrons, were not very successful against the elusive RAF aircraft. In one example of the daylight precision raids carried out by the Mosquito, on January 20, 1943, the 10th anniversary of the Nazis' seizure of power, a Mosquito attack knocked out the main Berlin broadcasting station while Commander-in-Chief Reichsmarschall Hermann Gar Paragraph Ring was speaking, putting his speech off air. Gar Paragraph Ring himself had strong views about the Mosquito, lecturing a group of German aircraft manufacturers in 1943 that, in 1940 I could at least fly as far as Glasgow in most of my aircraft, but not now. It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. I turn green and yellow with envy. The British, who can afford aluminium better than we can, knock together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory over there is building, and they give it a speed which they have now increased yet again. What do you make of that? There is nothing the British do not have. They have the geniuses and we have the nincompoops. After the war is over I'm going to buy a British radio set, then at least I'll own something that has always worked. The Mosquito also proved a very capable night fighter. Some of the most successful RAF pilots flew the Mosquito. Bob Braham claimed around a third of his 29 kills in a Mosquito, flying mostly daytime operations, while on night fighters Wing Commander Brant Burbridge claimed 21 kills, and Wing Commander John Cunningham claimed 19 of his 20 victories at night on Mosquitoes. Mosquitoes of No. 100 Group RAF were responsible for the destruction of 257 German aircraft from December 1943 to April 1945. Mosquito fighters from all units accounted for 487 German aircraft during the war, the vast majority of which were night fighters. One Mosquito is listed as belonging to German Secret Operations Unit Kampfgeschwader 200, which tested, evaluated and sometimes clandestinely operated captured enemy aircraft during the war. The aircraft was listed on the Order of Battle of Versuchsverband OKLs, 2 Staffel, Stabgruppe on November 10 and December 31, 1944. However, on both lists, the Mosquito is listed as unserviceable. The Mosquito flew its last official European war mission on May 21, 1945, when Mosquitoes of 143 Squadron and 248 Squadron RAF were ordered to continue to hunt German submarines that might be tempted to continue the fight. Instead of submarines all the Mosquitoes encountered were passive E-boats. Operators. Survivors. There are approximately 30 non-flying Mosquitoes around the world with 2 airworthy examples. The largest collection of Mosquitoes is at the de Havilland Aircraft Heritage Centre in the United Kingdom, which owns 3 aircraft, including the first prototype, W4050. possibly the only initial prototype of a Second World War aircraft design still in existence in the 21st century. Specifications: DH-98 Mosquito FMK2, fighter version. Data from Mosquito and Mosquito performance trials. General characteristics: crew, 2 pilot, navigator, radar operator, length, 41 feet 2 inches, wingspan, 54 feet 2 in, height, 17 feet 5 in, wing area, 454 feet 2, empty weight, 13,356 pounds, loaded weight, 17,700 pounds, max takeoff weight, 18,649 pounds, power plant, TUA, Rolls-Royce Merlin 21/21 or 23/23 liquid-cooled V12 engine, 1,480 horsepower each, performance, maximum speed 318 kn, at 21,400 aft, range, 782 nmi, with 410 gallons fuel load at 20,000 aft, service ceiling, 29,000 feet, rate of climb, 1,740 feet per minute, wing loading, 39.9 pounds per foot 2, power mass, 0.189 horsepower per pound, armament, guns, 4A, 20mm Hispano Mk2 cannon and 4A, .303 and Browning machine guns, avionics, AIMK4 or MKV radar, DH-98. Mosquito BMK-16, the definitive bomber version. Data from Jane's fighting aircraft of World War II and World War II warbirds. General characteristics: crew, 2 pilot, bombardier navigator, length, 44 ft 6 in, wingspan, 54 ft 2 in, height, 17 ft 5 in, wing area, 454 ft 2, empty weight, 14,300 lb, loaded weight, 18,100 lb, max takeoff weight, 25,000 lb, power plant, TUA, Rolls-Royce Merlin 76/77 liquid-cooled V12 engine, 1,710 HP. Each, performance, maximum speed, 361 kn, at 28,000 aft, range, 1,300 nmi, with full weapons load, service ceiling, 37,000 aft, rate of climb, 2,850 a foot per minute, wing loading, 39.9 a pound per foot 2, power mass, 0.189 a horsepower per pound, armament, bombs, 4,000 pounds, avionics, G-radio navigation, notable appearances in media. See also: Oslo Mosquito Raid, Operation Jericho, Operation to break prison walls to help get French prisoners out. Operation Carthage, related development, de Havilland Hornet Sea Hornet, aircraft of comparable role, configuration and era, Bristol Beaufighter, Douglas A-26 Invader, Heinkel He-219, Junkers Ju-88, Messerschmitt Me-410, related lists, list of aircraft of World War II, list of aircraft of the United Kingdom in World War II, list of fighter aircraft, list of bomber aircraft, references, notes. Citations. Bibliography. External links, Manual, April 2019 EPN. Pilot's Notes Mosquito FB6, The Mosquito page at mossie.org, de Havilland Aircraft Heritage Centre also known as Mosquito Aircraft Museum, Calgary Mosquito Aircraft Preservation Association, Victoria Air Maintenance Limited. Restoring a Mosquito to Flying Condition, The People's Mosquito Limited. Restoring RL-249 to flying condition. Website features WW2 color film of the Mosquito, de Havilland Mosquito magazine articles and publications, data at warbirdregistry.org, Mosquito Restoration Project New Zealand retrieved, January 3, 2012. Wartime film of the construction of the Mosquito in Australia retrieved, January 3, 2012. Flying plywood with a sting Popular Science article, December 1943, YouTube footage of Coastal Command Mosquito XVIIs retrieved, January 3, 2012. A close-up picture of the nose of a Tsetse Mosquito FBMK-18 showing the Mollins 57 ohm gun muzzle, A photograph of the Tsetse Mosquito FBMK 18NT225, Mosquito wars on U-boats with 6-pound shells. Popular Mechanics article, February 1945, PA 39. Mosquito Pathfinders, Pathfinder Museum, 627 Squadron RAF Mosquito Pathfinders based at RAF Woodlespa, Air Accident Investigation Branch report on the crash of TGASKH, 1996, IWM image of Mosquito Prairie 34 RG241, which holds the twin-piston engine Atlantic crossing record. America reports on aid to allies etc. Universal Newsreel. Mosquito makes base a 1943 flight article on a mosquito intruder's battle damage, pinpoint attack on one house by mosquitoes a 1944 flight advertisement, The Magnificent Mosquito a 1969 flight article by SCOMODR. Alan Wheeler,